Well, I've known Dr. Bailey for more than 40 years. I started as a young nurse on the cardiothoracic surgery unit in 1971, and he was a resident at that time. He went away to the Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto to do special training in pediatric cardiac surgery. And when he came back, he had a passion that he hadn't had before.
He witnessed what is known technically as hypoplastic left heart syndrome, where the left portion of the heart is normally what pushes the blood out into the system. And these kids did not have a left ventricle. And so that defect was 100% fatal.
You can't imagine you're expecting to have a normal baby, and then your child is born with this incorrectable heart disease. And you see this beautiful child is perfect in every other way. And he believed that heart transplantation was the solution to their problem.
Well, at that point in time, there were no infant hearts. There was nobody that was doing infant heart transplantation. And the kids with the hypoplastic heart defects continue to come along and continue to die. At one point in time, he said, well, we don't have infant hearts to transplant. What about using an animal heart? And an opportunity came along, and Lenny was far enough along in his experimentation work that he approached that mom and said, here's the story. We know what's going to happen. We would like to try to help her by putting in a baboon heart. And that was baby Faye. It was a failure that he took very personally. But what it did was it caught everybody in the world's attention. With the technical abilities to pull that off, heart donors became much more accessible. And from that point on, Lenny was able to use infant hearts for transplantation work. Without his vision, there are lots of kids out there running around today that would not be alive.
Growing up, we definitely noticed that he was something of an importance around just with people. We would go to meetings, or we traveled quite a bit for the mission trips to do surgeries. And at home, I mean, it was just he was dad, and he was definitely our superhero. But we'd always be outside playing. Had a big yard that was just filled with trees. He'd always help us make tree forts with my brother Connor and build RC tracks. And we went skiing quite a bit. So we were either up snow skiing, or he loved to windsurf. So we'd always go down to Lake Paris every day after he'd get off work and go windsurfing. We would always race, or going to the hospital, we'd always race up and down to his office, up the stairs. So he always had such a fun sense of humor, so everything was a joke, always smiling. If somebody asked him, are you Dr. Bailey? He'd be like, no, I'm Len. He almost shied away from it when people would bring it up.
So I remember the story well because it was the last time that I was taking call as a transplant coordinator. I had married and moved to Portland, Oregon, and also Dr. Bailey was not on call this particular night, but there had been a young girl, she was about 5 years old, who'd come to us from Japan, and she had waited a long time and was starting to develop near fatal arrhythmias. The cardiologist said that this child probably wouldn't live beyond the next day. There came a donor call about 2 in the morning. This was her only chance. And so I called Dr. Bailey, and as we often found out, when he's sleeping, he mumbles. You're never sure if he hears what you're saying, but he was processing it. And I told him what the other surgeon had said, that it was, too far away, it was too small, it was too long of a procurement time, and that this child was, failing quickly. And he said, well, I guess we have to let it go. And I said, okay, well, that seemed reasonable to me. And so I called the people in Pennsylvania and said, I'm sorry, we can't use the heart. And I tried to go back to sleep, and about 20 minutes later, beep, beep, beep. And it's Dr. Bailey, who's awake now. And he said, do you think I could come in and put this child onto bypass and we could go get the heart? I said, I've already turned the heart down. Oh, get it back. And so we did that. We went out and we got that heart. We came back, transplanted it into her, and she never looked back. She's done very, very well. She's graduated from university, and she's living a beautiful life in Japan. But she would have died. If it really hadn't been him, and he wasn't on call, He always would take the call. He just took ownership all the time. I mean, can you imagine what it's like to work with someone like that, who is predictable, who's always there, who believes in their dream always? The demands on Dr. Bailey were tremendous. I mean, we'd be awakened in the middle of the night many, many times, night after night. Sometimes he slept by the bed of a sick baby and slept in a chair, and we would go on procurements as far away as Halifax, Nova Scotia, or we went to Puerto Rico, to New York. All of this was in a day's work, and usually through the middle of the night. Then the next day he'd be back and have to do his regular operating schedule on top of that. I didn't realize how disruptive we were to their family life until one time we had a celebration when we had done our 100th infant transplant, and Nancy Bailey asked if she could get up and speak. And she told of several times when we had found him. One time they were in a campground of America with the boys. And he had mentioned to us that he was going away. And we got a donor call. We needed to have another surgeon. There wasn't one available. We sent the police in to get him, and they're overhead paging him, Dr. Bailey, Dr. Bailey. And they went in and they took him out and left Nancy there with the boys. And it was a pace that actually I would imagine very few people could keep up. But we never, ever found the bottom of his enthusiasm for what he was doing. I remember we had these big old clunky cell phones that we used to carry around, and he would often ask to borrow that cell phone when we had a quiet moment, and he would call his wife and let her know he was okay and what was happening.
So growing up, my parents always had what I call the biggest love story. So to the day right before they passed, they would leave love notes every morning. He'd leave a note for her and buy their coffee and pick roses for her, and she would do the same. His whole world was my mom. I mean, through surgeries or whatever it was. I mean, he always wanted to talk to her, see her, be around her. So I think it's just the love that they had.
The stakes were always very high. Sometimes we won when we weren't really expecting to, and other times we lost when we thought we should win. And the thing that struck me was that at his memorial service, there were many of the families who came to his memorial service who had lost a child. But they wanted to honor him because they know that he tried to save their child. And for them, that was important, and that was enough.
You don't learn medicine from a book. You learn medicine from your mentors. And Len was the best. One can look at the individuals in thoracic surgery, heart surgery that he mentored. They have been extremely successful, and they have carried that enthusiasm, and I'm sure they'll carry that with them the rest of their professional careers.
The first baby that we operated on was 4 days old. He's now 34 years old this birthday with that same original heart. So we've been blessed all along. You know, Dr. Bailey kept saying, I wonder what they'll be. It was, I know, very rewarding for him to see them grow up and become their own person.
The nature of his illnesses, I think, are reasonably well known. He had recurrence of a cancer process. Simultaneously, the love of his life, Nancy, also developed a malignant process that ultimately was fatal as well. Despite failing health, his goal was to hang on as long as he could to give Nancy the support that she needed. And ultimately, as that disease process took her, it was only a matter of a few weeks that he felt that his work here was complete.
Well, I think that I'll always carry the essence of him with me. I mean, to have that example of how to do life for so many years, it was amazing what he chose to do. I mean, all these people, hundreds, would be dead if he hadn't started doing this. And he started, and then others followed. You know, those doctors who came here from Japan for his memorial service, they had been here in the early days. In Japan, they didn't have organ donation, and they wanted to be ready for a time when the laws would change and people would accept organ donation, so they wanted to be prepared. And then they've gone back to Japan, and they've changed the laws in Japan, so now there is organ donation. in some way, he's sort of responsible for that too. That ripple effect is, in his case, is just amazing. And fortunately for me, I was able to share in his dream and become part of his team that brought heart transplantation to not only to Loma Linda, but really to the world.
My dad's mission always in life is just not necessarily change the world, but to change healthcare. To know that there's always going to be a better route for healing people that need the help. I think if I could take one thing from my dad that I'd want to be the most like, it's just how he was with people, just generally cared for everybody, and it was just always, I mean, he cared more about others than he did himself, it seems, most of the time, so I think that was a good way to live.